Welcome, class. It's time for the lecture on picking Tera types. This has been a highly requested video for a long time, but I've only just gotten around to it now because it's a very difficult topic to teach. Some would say that picking Tera types is more of an art than a science, and to some extent this is true. In a game as complicated, nuanced, and meta-dependent as competitive Pokemon, there are bound to be exceptions to every rule and every process. But I'm confident that I can provide you with a simpler way to think about Tera types and a consistent procedure to help guide you to the right Tera types. I'll be using examples from the main format in competitive Pokemon singles, Scarlet and Violet Overused, or OU for short, but the methods I go over will apply to almost all singles formats. Before we get into how to select the right Tera type, let's go over what kind of Tera types there are. And I don't just mean the 19 types. I've sorted Tera types into 4 quadrants based on how easy or difficult it is to select the best Tera type for that Pokemon, and how important it is to select the best Tera type for that Pokemon. An example of an important Pokemon to get the best Tera type on is a Swords Dance Kingambit. Kingambit uses Tera a lot, and what Tera type you select determines which Pokemon can stop its sweep, so it's very important to choose a good Tera type that fits your team. An unimportant Pokemon to get the best Tera type on would be Defensive Stealth Rock Landorus. Its ground and flying type combination is part of what makes it so great, and it almost never actually uses Tera. You could probably forget to change Landorus's Tera type from the default of ground, and it might take you dozens of games before you even notice. You can also think of importance as just how often that Pokemon uses Tera. If a Pokemon uses Tera all the time, it's going to be more important to select the right Tera type on that Pokemon. If a Pokemon almost never uses Tera, it's not going to matter much. Another way you can think of importance is how much that Tera type defines your team. If your team is built to support a certain sweeper or breaker, the Tera type on that sweeper or breaker is likely going to be very important. Like in the case of Kingambit, if you're Tera Dark Black Glasses, then that's a really good stall breaker. But if you're Tera Ghost Leftovers, then you'll need some other way to break stall teams, but your team is better against Corviknight. The Tera type you pick on that Kingambit changes how you might build your team, so that's another thing making it important. Now let's move on to the concept of how easy it is to select a Tera type. One of the easiest Pokemon to pick a Tera type on is Choice Band Low-Kicks. Tera Bug Tinted Lens First Impression is what makes Low-Kicks so great. Any other Tera type is almost always a mistake. 92% of Low-Kicks in High Ladder use Tera Bug, so basically every time you use Low-Kicks, you can slap on Tera Bug and it'll be the right call. A difficult Pokemon to select a Tera type for would be Iron Moth. It has 6 Tera types that are very solid, and which one to pick depends on what your team needs, and what you're okay with Iron Moth being walled by. There's no easy Tera type you can just slap on. So another way to think of Tera type ease is just how many Tera types that Pokemon can viably run. Now we're going to go over these Tera types in 4 groups. The first is the easy and important group. These are Pokemon that are really good at using one Tera type, they use Tera frequently, and you pretty much always just want to go with that common Tera type. The next is the moderately difficult and important group. These are Pokemon with 2 to 4 viable Tera types that also use Tera frequently. Next is the difficult and important group. These are Pokemon with 5+ viable Tera types that also use Tera frequently. And finally, Category 4 is the not important category. We're grouping all of these unimportants together for this video. The method of selecting Tera types on unimportant Pokemon is consistent across the board, and also the easy and not important category doesn't really exist. When a Tera type is easy to select, it's usually because the Tera type is extremely good on that Pokemon. That Tera type being extremely good makes it important. It inherently implies that the Pokemon is frequently using Tera. In almost every case, unimportant Tera types are chosen based on team-specific needs, which makes them more difficult to select. Alright, now let's go over how to pick Tera types for the first category, easy and important. As I said, these are Pokemon that are really good at using one specific Tera type, and they use Tera at least somewhat frequently in games. So I've got some examples here. Choice Band Low-Kicks, we've discussed already. Choice Band Rillaboom uses Tera Grass for a lot of the same reasons. Grassy Glide is going to get a lot of kills it wouldn't otherwise with Tera Grass. Tera Grass Woodhammer allows you to break a lot of Pokemon you wouldn't be able to break otherwise. It's just by far the most consistent Tera type on Choice Band Rillaboom. Now, I'm not saying it is the only choice. Some people have run a choice band Rillaboom with Tera Blast, Rock, or Electric. So if your team really likes killing birds and you already have a good matchup into Hyper Offense and Stall, maybe Tera Blast Electric is the right move. But in almost every case, you're just going to want to go with Tera Grass. Modest Specs Walking Wake. This is mostly here on Sun teams to break Stall, and Tera Water is what's going to make that happen. You can click Hydro Steam, you 2-hit KO Blissey, you 2-hit KO absolutely everything. So running anything other than Tera Water is just a really odd move. Now, once again, there are exceptions. Maybe there's a really annoying Clodsire team that's been going around and you want to run Tera Dragon Draco Meteor for a 50% chance to one-hit KO. But generally, Tera Water is the move. Life Orb Swords Dance Ceruledge. Once again, see this kind of common theme with priority. +2 Life Orb Shadow Sneak with Tera Ghost gets you a lot of kills you wouldn't get otherwise with that Tera Ghost. So, especially also with powering up Poltergeist, Tera Fire probably wouldn't be the worst. A Tera type to resist Sucker Punch wouldn't be the worst, but almost always Tera Ghost is going to be the best, so you just want to slap that on. Choice Band Dragonite, another example. Tera Normal Extreme Speed gets you a lot of kills you wouldn't get otherwise. It's by far the most consistent option, and I, of course, had to include Wellspring. I didn't want to leave this out. I figured a lot of people would tell me about this if I didn't. Obviously, on a Pokemon that is Tera locked, you literally cannot run any other Tera type than Water. You're going to want to run Tera Water. Now, what if you're saying, well, Pinkacross, how do I know which Pokemon have these super obvious, really good Tera types? Well, the first way to know is just experience. As you play a lot of games, you'll notice some Pokemon are running the same Tera type almost all the time. Secondly, you can look at usage stats. There are a lot of websites that provide usage stats. My personal favorite is Munch Stats, which I'll link in the description. But you see here, if I search Rillaboom and filter for a higher ELO, I see 65% running Tera Grass. That is a lot. And the ones that aren't running Tera Grass are probably not choice band sets for the most part. So if you see a Pokemon running a Tera type around 60% of the time or more, that's probably an indicator you should slap on that Tera type almost every time. Alright, now let's get into the moderately difficult and important group. These are Pokemon that use Tera at least somewhat frequently, so it's important to pick a good Tera type, but unlike the first category, there's not just one obvious option. Garganacl has two very popular Tera types, Water and Fairy. With most Pokemon in this zone, the right choice depends on the team surrounding it. That's going to be a consistent theme here. A lot of picking Tera types is not going to just be about the specific Pokemon or the set you're running, but the surrounding team. So if your team has issues with Gholdengo, you probably want Tera Water on Garganacl. If your team has issues with Specs Dragapult clicking Draco Meteor, you probably want Tera Fairy. And if you're not sure if you have any such issues swaying you one way or the other, you can just test them out. Tera Water one game, Tera Fairy the next, and see which one is useful more often. Zamazenta has 3 common Tera types, Dark, Fire, and Steel. Once again, this comes down to the team. If your team struggles with Will-O-Wisp Dragapult, probably makes sense to go Tera Fire. If you're really counting on Zamazenta to be a sweeper, Tera Dark is probably best, so your Crunch can actually do significant damage to Pokemon like Gholdengo, Pecharunt, Galarian Slowking, makes you less likely for your Zamazenta to just get shut down. Steel is great for being immune to Toxic and resisting Fairy. So if your Zamazenta's running Heavy Slam instead of Roar, that also might lead you to want to run Steel. Steel would be more worthwhile to get the power up on that move. So slight variations in sets make different Tera types more worthwhile as well. Raging Bolt, once again, this guy has 4 common Tera types. So Fairy, Bug, Ghost, and Flying are all popular, and all are good options. Now, if you're running Raging Bolt on grassy terrain, you probably don't want to go with Tera Flying since you'll lose terrain healing. If you're running Raging Bolt on a Sticky Web team, you'll probably want Tera Ghost to block Rapid Spin from Great Tusk and Iron Treads. Scarf Darkrai runs usually either Tera Poison, Ghost, or Dark. Poison, of course, gives you the Fairy and Fighting Resist and a nice boost on Sludge Bomb. Dark is just going to make Dark Pulse really strong, and Tera Ghost gives you the ability to Spin Block, immunity to Fighting, and you can do the funny thing where you Tera Ghost and trick a Zamazenta and lock it into Body Press on you. Really just depends on what your team appreciates most. Petrun uses Tera pretty frequently, whether to spin block better or to stop sweepers. Tera Ghost, Fairy, and Dark are the most common. Ghost is great for maintaining your spin blocking capability while losing that weakness to ground, so you can switch in on Tusk and Treads better. Dark lets you resist Dark and Ghost and become immune to Psychic, which is nice, but it also makes your Petrun no longer an answer to Zamazenta. So if you have something else on your team that can handle Zamazenta well, like a defensive Zapdos, it's more okay to go with Tera Dark. But if you're counting on that Petrun to answer Zamazenta, probably Tera Fairy or Ghost is better. Now, always in particular, when selecting Tera types on defensive Pokemon, ask yourself, what defensive role is this Pokemon performing? If it Teras, does it still perform that role? And if not, is that okay for the team? Can I take that? Choice Specs Kyurem is our last example here. Typically, these guys are just going to go with Tera Ice, but Tera Dragon, Draco Meteor is a nice option as well. But once again, it's going to depend a little bit on your surrounding team. If you plan on clicking Draco Meteor a lot, that's a lot of free switch-ins for Fairy types to potentially try to revenge kill. Whereas it's not going to be quite as easy for a lot of Fairy types to come in if you are clicking Tera Ice, Ice Beam, and Freeze Dry more often. So if part of your plan is clicking Draco Meteor, Tera Dragon, Draco Meteor, you want to make sure your team is really well set up to switch into those Fairy types, so every time Kyurem clicks Draco Meteor, you don't lose something on your team too. So just another example of how these little choices in Tera types you should really consider what else your team has and what support the Pokemon has. And once again, just like last time, if you don't know which Pokemon fall into this category, if you're not sure if a Pokemon has, 10 viable Tera types or 1 or 3 or 4, just check the usage stats. And you will see, if you look at these Pokemon, you will see for everything on this list, anywhere from 2 to 4 Tera types are going to be really common, and then there's a sharp drop off where there'll be something with like Tera type with like 2%, and there'll be others with, in the range of like 50, 30, 20. So just check the usage stats and it will become clear. Alright, now for the difficult and important category. These are Pokemon with 5+ viable Tera types, and they use Tera, once again, at least somewhat frequently. Kingambit is the most classic example of this. Even if you have the most standard Kingambit set ever, Leftover Swords Dance, do you go Tera Ghost for fighting moves, Tera Fairy for fighting moves and also not gaining other significant weaknesses, Tera Fire for burns, Tera Flying for immunity to ground, Tera Dark for powering up Sucker Punch and Kowtow Cleave? It's a lot to think about. The method is the same as the previous category though. Ask yourself what the team needs, or if you're still building, pick which set you personally like most and then structure the team around it. If you have a problem with fire types and no Will-O-Wisp Absorber, probably go Tera Fire on your Kingambit. If you have issues with Corviknight, and that keeps stopping your sweeps, probably go with Tera Ghost. Testing is also key here. You can start your Kingambit with whatever Tera you just personally prefer, and then see how often you're glad you had that Tera type. Keep a log. Which games would Tera Ghost have saved you? How often do you wish you had Tera Flying? And so on. And it's a similar process with the rest. For the case of Iron Moth, if your team struggles with Ceruledge and Heatran, Tera Blast Water is probably a great choice. If Dragapult is a recurring issue, maybe switch out Tera Blast for Dazzling Gleam and go with Tera Fairy. Test and see. Gholdengo is another tricky one. A lot of Gholdengo sets like Scarf don't particularly care about Tera type, but Nasty Plot sets, there are a ton of Tera types you can run, and it really influences what can stop your sweep. You could maybe on this set switch out Dazzling Gleam for Make It Rain and go with Tera Water or Tera Flying. Those are great defensive Tera types on Gholdengo. Some sets of Gholdengo are really obvious to pick the Tera type for, like if you go with Metal Coat, Make It Rain, then obviously you just want to go with Tera Steel so you can destroy stall teams, but in many cases there are going to be a lot of Tera types to consider with Gholdengo. Iron Valiant can be tough too. They can use Ghost to be immune to extreme speed and Zamazenta body press. Steel gives you immunity to Toxic and a lot of valuable resistances. You could also go with a Stab option to boost the power of Moonblast. You could switch out Psyshock on this set for Thunderbolt and then go with Tera Electric. Once again, consider the team surrounding it and test alternatives on the ladder. You may notice I didn't include Dragonite on this list, which is a somewhat notorious Tera sweeper with about 8 different Tera types it uses. The reason I didn't include it here is that the Tera type choice for Dragonite is often really obvious depending on the set. Let's say you're going with a loaded dice set. These run Dragon Dance, Fire Punch, Scale Shot, and Encore typically. On this, you're almost always going to run Tera Fire. There's really no question about that. If you're running a standard set, heavy-duty boots, with the extreme speed, ice spinner, earthquake combo, you're basically almost always going to go Tera normal, sometimes Tera ground. And if you're running one of the Roost Tera Blast sets, this is always basically going to be flying or fairy. So for any particular set of Dragonite, it's either going to be into the easy and important category or the moderately difficult and important category. So that's why Dragonite's been left out of this. Whereas a lot of these Pokemon, even if you have almost the exact set down, it's still really tough to pick. Now, this is a bit of an arbitrary line to draw because sets do go hand in hand with Tera types. Like if I'm running Thunderbolt on my Iron Valiant, that makes Tera Electric way more likely to be the right choice. If I'm not using Tera Blast on my Iron Moth, it makes a lot more sense to go with the Tera type of whatever coverage I decide to run, like Tera Grass for Energy Ball or Tera Fairy for Dazzling Gleam. The scope of this video is how to pick Tera types once you have the sets of your team generally decided. If I were to try to get into how to pick the right sets for your team, this video would just be way too long and too sprawling and cover way too many topics to be helpful. But if picking the right set is something you struggle with, I highly recommend checking out my Team Building Guides playlist, where I have many videos explaining how to team build with examples. Okay, now for the last section, the unimportant section, or really the unimportant and difficult section. What made the previous two categories difficult is that the Tera type selection depends on the surrounding team. You can't just look at the Pokemon in a vacuum and already know what Tera type it needs. And the same is true for the unimportant category, more so than ever. On Pokemon that rarely use Tera, the best way to pick Tera types is to focus on the rare matchups where that Pokemon using Tera could be useful. Those rare matchups or those rare situations. Corviknight is almost never going to Tera. Its typing is amazing. You very, very rarely want to lose it. But maybe you have this one annoying matchup, this one team you've been running into with this Zapdos. So you can go Tera Electric on your Corviknight, so it could sweep with Iron Defense Body Press. Or maybe you go Tera Water to handle Dragon Dance, Tera Blast, Fire, Kyurem. Maybe a team like that's been annoying you. So these issues will probably be found as you play with the team. You're probably not going to instantly know as you put a Corviknight into your team what weird matchup you might want to Tera it for. So generally what you want to do is just start with a popular placeholder. And on Corviknight, Tera Dragon is the most popular since it lets you resist Fire and Electric. Those are the only two types Corviknight's weak to, and it can act as an emergency answer to Wellspring. And if you never encounter a matchup that makes you wish Corviknight was something else, it's totally okay to stick with the default. I have a lot of teams where I do stick with Tera Dragon on Corviknight. So yeah, for Pokemon in this Tera type unimportant category, the best move is to just slap on a default popular type and change later for those rare matchups if you find another type works better. For Great Tusk, Tera Steel is a great default. Maybe later you decide to switch to Fire if your Tusk is getting burned too often, or something like Tera Normal if your team has no Ghost immunity and you're having issues with Choice Specs Tera Ghost Dragapult. Water is a nice default on Landorus, lets you resist water and ice. Ghost is also somewhat popular, so Landorus can become a spin blocker. Treads runs Ghost a lot of the time to become a spin blocker. Tornadus runs Steel just for the nice resistances it offers. Also nice against Kyurem. I had a team where I started with Tera Steel on Assault Vest Tornadus, but I later changed it to Tera Ice to be even better against Substitute Kyurem. Not a super common matchup, but it was a specific Pokemon that was tough for that team, so I changed one of the Pokemon that's not going to frequently Tera to help that matchup a lot. That's the way you want to use Tera on these unimportant Pokemon. Torkoal definitely won't Tera often. Most weather setters, screen setters, terrain setters, and hazard setters are in this unimportant category, since you generally want to save Tera for the abusers. But Tera Ghost is the most popular option since it lets Torkoal block Rapid Spin, which is probably the only reason you'd end up actually wanting to use Tera on Torkoal. But maybe you want to go Tera Ground, take less damage from Stealth Rock, maybe get a surprise KO on Galarian Slowking with Earthquake. So the procedure for these Pokemon is simple. If you spot a troublesome matchup that a Tera type on an unimportant Pokemon could fix or help, go for it. And if not, you just throw on a popular default type until you discover such a matchup when testing your team on the ladder. I also want to mention a few types that are helpful to slap onto unimportant Tera Pokemon. Poison is a great type to have a toxic spike absorber. Depending on how much of your team is grounded and how easily your team can KO Glamora without hitting it with a physical attack, often you don't need a toxic spike absorber, but in some matchups it can be a big deal. So I'll often slap Tera Poison onto a Great Tusk or a Ting-Lu. All types that provide immunities are also nice. If your team has no ground immunity, you can put Tera Flying on something like your Primarina in case you face a Choice Band, Tera Ground, Headlong Rush, Great Tusk, and Sun, or something like that. Now, note that this is not a substitute for having ways to deal with ground types or any other type. This is something I want to emphasize. No Tera types are a substitute for having an actual answer to a certain type or common Pokemon. I just mean that, suppose your team has a ground resist like Ogerpon Wellspring that works well most of the time, but then you face something like a Choice Band Landorus team and that Earthquake is tough to deal with. It's nice to have Tera Flying on something for those rare matchups where you face a really powerful ground type. So maybe you put Tera Flying on your Iron Treads, maybe your Primarina, whatever. But a Tera Flying Iron Treads is absolutely not the same as having a ground immunity or a ground resist. It's for covering rare matchups. Anyway though, continuing on with Tera types that provide immunities, Tera Fairy is also nice. Your team may already have a dragon resist, say a steel type like Kingambit, but if you face a particularly strong dragon type, like a Choice Band Dragapult that can wear down your team with Dragon Darts, or a Choice Specs Kyurem with Draco Meteor, it's nice to be able to pull out an immunity. Tera Ghost is great in general. I put that on a lot of Pokemon that don't care much about Tera because being able to turn half your team into a rapid spin blocker all of a sudden can be really helpful. Tera Normal is also a bit underrated in my opinion. I've used teams that are a little bit weak to Ghost, so I just put Tera Normal on every Pokemon that Tera isn't important for. Alright, now we're going to go through some examples and apply this to some real teams. But first, let's do a quick summary of what we've gone over so far. We've sorted Tera types into 4 categories. Category 1, easy and important. These are Pokemon that are great at using one Tera type, and you can just use that almost every time. Category 2 and 3 are moderately difficult and important, and difficult and important. The Tera type that you pick for both of these depends on the specific set you're running and the team surrounding this Pokemon. The procedure for selecting Tera types is the same for both of these categories. The difference is just how many good Tera types they can run. The more viable Tera types, the harder it is to pick the best one. And lastly, Category 4, unimportant. These Pokemon can run almost any Tera type, and what you pick depends almost entirely on the team surrounding it. So almost every type is on the table, making these perhaps the hardest of all to pick the best Tera type for. The good news, though, is that if you don't make a good choice, it probably won't matter, since these Pokemon almost never Tera anyway. And note that a lot of Pokemon and sets are going to be somewhere in between these categories. Zamazenta and Dragonite were both in the important area by this sorting method, but they're important to different degrees. Dragonite definitely uses Tera more often than Zamazenta. Ting-Lu doesn't frequently use Tera, but it definitely uses Tera more often than Corviknight. Garganacl absolutely loves using Tera, so the importance of that is higher than even something like Kingambit, which loves to use Tera, but not quite as often as Garganacl. These categories aren't hard lines, they're just here to help simplify the process of picking Tera types. Alright, so now you understand what kinds of Tera type Pokemon there are, and we've gone over some examples of what might motivate you to pick a certain Tera type over another. But now let's go through some examples with full teams, and define a process that you can use to pick Tera types on your own teams. Before that though, if you're getting something out of this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps out a lot. Alright now, example 1. Here we have a hazard stack team. So generally you don't want to decide on Tera types until you've finished putting all 6 Pokemon in the builder. Now you don't necessarily need to have the sets to all the Pokemon down yet, since the set and Tera type are often closely linked, but you want to have a general idea of the sets down, and you definitely want to have 6 Pokemon in the builder. There are 2 exceptions to this though, Pokemon that you want to put the Tera type on when you're still building the team. The first exception is if that Tera type is structurally important, changes how the team works, and changes what Pokemon you might add. In this case, I put Tera Ice on Thundurus Therian while I was still building the team, before I added these remaining members. And the reason is that the breaking core of this Hazard Stack team relies upon Tera Ice Thundurus Therian. The plan against stall teams is to click knockoff against special walls like Blissey and Clodsire and wear them down with Hazards and Volt Switch, but there's still the Gliscor problem, especially defensive Gliscor. Tera Blast, Fairy, and Flying are also popular options on Thundurus Therian, and if I went with either of those, I would no longer be able to break specially defensive Gliscor, which is on almost every stall team. Thus, I would need something else on my team to assist with the stall matchup. So putting Tera Ice on this Thundurus was important so I could continue the build, knowing I did not need additional Pokemon to help me in that stall matchup. The other exception to this rule is just when a Pokemon falls into the easy and important category. Like if I had a Choice Band Low Kicks on this team, sure, you can throw Terabug on that right when you add it to the team. It doesn't matter, since realistically, you're not going with any other Tera type anyway. So, you've got to pick some Tera types as you build your team because they're very important to how the team functions. After that, though, what do? We've got 5 Pokemon without Tera types selected. Well, what you want to do is go in order of importance. What Tera type you select on one Pokemon is going to affect the other Tera types you pick. So we want to start with the Pokemon that are going to use Tera most frequently. On this team, the most important by far is Thundurus. And as I explained, we have Tera Ice. Probably most games, I'm just going to use Tera Ice on Thundurus. The next most important, though, which means the Pokemon I expect will most frequently use Tera, is either going to be Zamazenta or Scizor. Let's do Zamazenta. And it doesn't matter precisely if you know exactly which Pokemon are going to use Tera at which frequency. You just want to generally start with the more important Pokemon so you can make better informed choices on the less important Pokemon, and you can save, for these earlier Pokemon, you can go with the Tera type they really want and not just a Tera type the team needs for support, for shoring up a bad matchup. We really want to pick these first so we can really go with a Tera type that's going to suit this Pokemon and work well for them. So, let's as I said, let's do Zamazenta. So this is one of those moderately difficult and important Tera types. As I said earlier, common options are Steel, Dark, and Fire. This team honestly really hates Will-O-Wisp Dragapult, especially since those sets run heavy-duty boots, which is obviously not fun for Hazard Stack, so I'm inclined to go Tera Fire here. I'm also not counting on Zamazenta to break. We have a breaking core with Thundurus, so Tera Dark isn't needed, and Tera Steel isn't bad, but I already have 2 Steel types, and Fire is really going to help with Dragapult. Now let's go to Scizor. So once again, moderately difficult and important Tera type. I've got a pivoting set on this, so it can do a Volt core with Thundurus Therian. And Scizor basically uses 3 Tera types: Steel, Fire, and Electric. Usually with Tera Blast, if it's going Fire or Electric. And in this case, I'm not running Tera Blast, as I have Tera Blast on Thundurus. You generally don't want to run 2 Tera Blast Pokemon on a team. And I'd say probably the most likely reason I'd Tera this Scizor is just to get a KO with Bullet Punch that I wouldn't get otherwise. So Tera Steel is the most common option, works fine here. Now, these last 3 Pokemon all fall into the not important category. I'm very rarely going to Tera these guys. I will say, though, Choice Scarf Gholdengo, not the best spin blocker, right? 1 read from a Great Tusk and I'm dead. So probably the best move here is turning Landorus and Samurott into emergency spin blockers with Tera Ghost. And lastly, we get to Gholdengo. It's here for speed control and to help out with Zamazenta, which is a bit of a threat to this team. See, Iron Defense Zamazenta, kind of tough for me. So I don't want my Tera type to make me worse against Zamazenta, ideally. So that kind of makes Ghost and Fairy and potentially Flying look like kind of the options that pop out there. But I also noticed my team doesn't have any Dragon immunity. It would also be nice for Gholdengo to resist Kingambit's Sucker Punch. So there are a lot of things here pointing me toward Tera Fairy. Now I won't Tera Gholdengo often, but it might be nice when facing like a Choice Specs Tera Dragon Curem team that's destroying everything with Draco Meteor, or surviving a Kingambit Sucker Punch, or tricking it and then surviving a Kowtow Cleave. So I won't Tera Gholdengo often, but Fairy is probably going to be best for me. And the next step would just be to test this team on ladder and see how it does. And those Tera types worked well for me when I played the team, so I stuck with them. Before we move on, something else I want to note on this team is that you see we have one Pokemon on the team that heavily relies on Tera, and that's Thundurus. Zamazenta likes Tera, but it doesn't need it. Scizor likes it, but doesn't need it. And everything else really doesn't care. These Pokemon aren't going to use Tera often. So if you notice that a lot of Pokemon in your team really like to use Tera, you kind of in that first stage where you're trying to put Tera types in the most important Pokemon and realize you've got a lot of Pokemon that are really frequently like to use Tera, that's probably not going to work well. Like if you have, say, a Garganacl, Dragonite, and a Tera Blast Kyurem on the same team, that is cause for concern, especially if one of them is an extreme Tera hog, like this Thundurus, something that wants to use Tera almost every game. It's important to make sure nothing else on your team badly wants Tera as well. All right, let's do one more example. This is a fun Farigiraf Hyper Offense team I recently made. So when the team was completed, there were 2 Tera types I already had filled in. Just to give you an idea of what the team here, it's a Screens team, just got a Booster Speed Tusk, Nasty Plot Pecharunt, Standard Bolt, Kingambit, and the Farigiraf. So, as I said, yes, when the team was completed, there were already 2 Tera types I had filled in. The first is this Farigiraf. This is the Pokemon I was building around, and this set with Tera Blast and Tera Fighting was selected just based on looking at the tier and finding what set I thought was best. You often want to select the Tera type of the Pokemon you're building around. This definitely falls into that exception I discussed earlier, where you generally want to wait to do Tera types until the end, unless that Tera type has structural importance to the team. So since this Farigiraf is Tera Blast Fighting, it is not walled by Kingambit, and thus I don't need to pair it with Pokemon that are going to wear down opposing Kingambit. So you see, the fact that we have this Tera Blast Fighting picked early on is relevant for building, so you want to decide that earlier. And the second Tera type I already had selected was Kingambit. I realized that without Tera Dark and Black Glasses, I wasn't going to be able to break Stall. So it was crucial for this team's breaking core that Kingambit be Tera Dark. But now we've got 4 Pokemon without Tera types. So let's go in order of importance. Which is going to use Tera the most other than Kingambit and Farigiraf? Probably Raging Bolt. That's a moderately difficult and important Tera type to select. So as I said earlier, we've got 4 tried and tested good options: Fairy, Ghost, Bug, and Flying. So one thing I noticed, Air Balloon Pecharunt is the only ground immunity on this team. So I probably want either Bug or Flying on this Raging Bolt to improve my ground matchup. But I also noticed that my team really does not like Kyurem. We have 2 ice weaknesses, and the only resist is Kingambit, which most Kyurem have a way of getting past. So that's going to push me to go with Tera Bug on Raging Bolt. Next most important, definitely going to be Nasty Plot Pecharunt. Once again, this falls into that moderately difficult and important category. So we've got 3 good options: Ghost, Dark, and Fairy. Well, I can see right away that this Pecharunt is the only answer to Zamazenta. So if I Tera Dark this thing, we are losing to Zamazenta. So that means probably Ghost or Fairy is the best call. And since this is a Screens team, meaning Infiltrator Dragapult is always a bit of a concern, I'm more inclined to go with Fairy, so I can avoid getting one-hit KO'd by a Specs Tera Dragon Draco Meteor with Infiltrator to get through screens. So Fairy it is. Now, a quick aside here, I've played so many games and built so many teams that these kinds of thoughts are automatic to me. Like, when I pick a Pecharunt Tera type, I consider Zamazenta, and I know that in the back of my mind that Infiltrator Dragapult is rough for screens. You probably don't have this level of experience yet, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with saying, Tera Dark looks good here on Pecharunt. Maybe that can help me get past a Kingambit. And then you test it on ladder, you Tera Dark Pecharunt, you get wrecked by a Zamazenta or some other fighting type, and you change it. So the purpose of this video is to explain how I pick Tera types and give you a procedure to do that, but really, just playing with your team on the ladder and testing different Tera types is always going to give you the right answer if you're observant and patient. Okay, so now we just have Great Tusk and Grimmsnarl left. Both of these definitely fall into the unimportant category. So Steel is the most popular on Great Tusk, and that seems good here. This team has a bit of a problem with Fairy and Ice types. Fairy in particular, with 3 weaknesses and 1 resist. So The default seems to fit the team's struggles as well. And on Grimmsnarl, Ghost and Steel are the most common Tera types. But as I said, this team has a bit of a problem with Fairy and Ice types, so I'm inclined to go with Steel on Grimmsnarl as well. And remember, if you don't know the common Tera types, just check the usage stats. I've got the link to the usage stat website I use in the description. Now, I also want to note that with these last couple Pokemon, we focused more on the needs of the team than what Great Tusk or Grimmsnarl individually particularly want. Right? On Farigiraf, I picked Tera Fighting when I built this team because I spent 20 minutes looking at the tier and trying to find the Farigiraf set that would cover the most Pokemon and be as offensively threatening as possible. On Kingambit, we went Tera Dark to turn it into a stall breaker. But on Great Tusk and Grimmsnarl, we slapped on Tera Steel because the team as a whole has issues with Fairy and Ice. And that's how it should be. The frequent Tera users should have their Tera types selected to make them as potent as possible, whereas the unimportant Tera types, the Pokemon that are almost never going to use Tera, have those types to support the team in those rare matchups where certain weaknesses become a big problem. Say this team faces a Choice Specs and Namorous. Maybe that Tera Steel Grimmsnarl saves us from getting destroyed. Now that we've seen those examples, let's summarize the process for picking Tera types. So, step 1, as you team build, if you add a Pokemon whose Tera type is a key part of how the team functions, that should be the first thing you pick, even before adding another Pokemon to the team. That's probably going to be the key Pokemon in your Breaking Core, or the Pokemon your team is centered around. So, you should pick the Tera type just based on what you think is strongest on that Pokemon. Step 2, finish the team. Get all 6 Pokemon and their general sets laid out. Step 3, put Tera types on the obvious Pokemon. If you've got a Choice Band Low Kicks or Rillaboom, just put on Tera Grass and Bug and be done with it. You can also do this when you first put the Pokemon onto the team. The order doesn't really matter for this step. Step 4, identify the Pokemon that is most likely to terastallize that you haven't already selected a Tera type for, and pick a Tera type based on what that Pokemon wants and what fits with the Tera types you've already selected. And step 5, repeat step 4 until everything on the team has Tera types. And note that the less likely a Pokemon is to terastallize, the more you want to consider the needs of the team rather than what that Pokemon individually might want, since it probably doesn't want any Tera type that badly. Those unimportant Pokemon's Tera types are there to shore up team weaknesses and cover the rare matchups where you will want to Tera that Pokemon. Those unimportant Pokemon's Tera types are there to shore up team weaknesses and cover the rare matchups and situations where you will want to Tera that Pokemon. Well, now you understand how to pick Tera types. Before I end the video though, there are 2 things I want to mention. The first is that you're probably too worried about picking the right Tera types. A ton of players have expressed to me that this is something they are really uncertain of and they feel like it's an area where they struggle. In reality, it doesn't matter all that much. As long as you're not putting garbage Tera types on the Pokemon that really matter a lot, like you're not doing something horrible like putting Tera Grass on your Dragonite for some reason, or running Tera Rock on your Garganacl to power up Salt Cure, there's really nothing to worry about. For less important Tera types, you can just test the team on ladder and see what works. You don't need to be an expert on picking Tera types, and there are tons of way more important things about a team, like how does your team make progress? Does your team have priority? Does it have speed control? All of this is way more important than Tera types. I've had players who have come to me with a Jumpluff on their team, and yet their concern is whether their Kingambit should be Tera Ghost or Tera Fire. So basically, stop stressing so much about Tera types. This procedure I've outlined will help you reach the right Tera types faster, but you can always just test different Tera types in the ladder and see what works best, and you'll get a good result. The second thing I want to mention is that truly great team builders can spot the rare cases where a typical Tera type is not a good idea. Almost all the time, the common Tera types are the best Tera types. They emerge as highly used for a reason. But there is a benefit to a surprise factor, or maybe you've just found a Tera type that works really well that nobody has caught on to yet. There was a time where almost nobody used Tera Ghost on Dragonite, then for a couple months a Dragon Dance, Tera Blast, Ghost, Low Kick, Encore Dragonite set was taking over the ladder. So if you think you have an idea for a Tera type that works well, even if that Tera type is below 1% usage, give it a try. It never hurts to test. Particularly on offensive Pokemon and sweepers, unexpected Tera types can be very potent. Well, that's all I have to say. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or if you want any help selecting Tera types for your team. If you post your team in the comments, though, make sure to send the actual importable text for your team, not a link to a site like PokePaste or Pastebin. YouTube often deletes comments with links. And if you enjoyed the video and or learned something, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Well, that's all. Class dismissed.